welcome Melissa and Maria. We have had a few people waiting for a few minutes. If you'd like, we're inviting people to write in the chat where you are from or where you're currently viewing this webinar from. And it is time. So here comes someone else. We may have a few more people coming in, but we're going to start on time as we said we would so that we honor everyone's time together and we can make the most of this time. So thank you so much. Let me just say to everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm personally very excited to just see some faces and hear from people, whatever your questions or comments may be. We're a fairly new company trying to offer what we can to help out homeschoolers and other educators who are interested in seeing what Waldorf can be in various settings, because it is adaptable and wonderful. We love it, so we hope you love it too. I'll say a brief introduction for myself, and then when I turn some questions to Lynne Poirier, our special guest, I will give a brief introduction of Lynn as well. I have been a Waldorf teacher. I was finished my training in the year 2000 from the Rudolf Steiner College. I worked at a Waldorf school for 22 years. Only recently did I just finish, just a couple of weeks ago. In that time, I was a class teacher in the grades for 18 years. And then I was the pedagogical development director, helping train teachers on site for a couple of years. I was the school administrator for a year. And this past year, I have been focused on Simply Waldorf, as well as teaching some subject classes at that Waldorf school. Now I am completely devoted to Simply Waldorf, and we're really going to try and build some momentum with this company. So I'm very excited. I don't pretend to be an expert. I do pretend to have a certain kind of experience of working with kids in the Waldorf setting, but I'm always trying to learn more, and that certainly includes learning how we can best support homeschooling families. So in that regard, I'm quite a newbie, and that's why I'm so excited about today. So we wanted to start with a nice topic, something that we can all relate to, and that is the importance of play. What is the importance of play? I think we all have a sense that it is important, whether we are convinced by research or the testimonials of experts. It seems quite obvious that play is important. Anyone who's interested in Waldorf education must have an innate sense of that. Nevertheless, there is some great research that helps us feel affirmed and reassured that play indeed is vital to human development. So I'm going to share a few things from a particular article that I've read and reread because I find it so thorough and well researched. And it comes from, the author is Kenneth Ginsberg. He's an MD. He's part of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and he wrote this article in 2007 titled "The Importance of Play in Promoting Healthy Child Development and Maintaining Strong Parent-Child Bonds." You will all receive an email from us following this webinar in which that and a few other resources will be included. So you don't have to try to write all that down that I just said and go find it yourself. We're actually sending you that link. And in an opening quote in that article, he says, "Play is so important to optimal child development that it has been recognized by the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights as a right of every child." So I just think that's a wonderful quote to show us how it's not just educators, it's not just parents, it's people in very high positions of influence who are recognizing the importance of play and the need to demonstrate that commitment to it by making it a human right, the ability to play. It sounds strange to me that we would need to make it a right, and yet at the same time, it is evidence that there are researchers who know it needs to be protected, and for good reason. So I find that encouraging in a way. It's a little sad that we have to, but it's encouraging that we are doing it. So, yes, we intuitively know that play is important. We certainly experience it in our own childhood and hopefully adulthood, that play is simply enjoyable. It's a wonderful thing. And we see the evidence of it even in the natural world around us, in the animal kingdom, especially in those in the mammalian kingdom, and certainly within the primates, we see that play is an evident part of the development of young in achieving skills and capacities that will serve them even in their adult lives. So we have lots of evidence that play is important, but I'm going to present some. Most of it is from this article that I've cited, as well as I'm going to add to it another perspective. So in this article, which is written mostly to pediatricians, he cites two important facets of play. One, he focuses mainly on undirected or child-directed play, so the free play of children, how important that is. And then he talks about the benefit of that on the parent-child bond. It was right there in the title. So I'm certainly going to look at some of the things he presents in the article, but I'm going to add to it because of my own experiences as a parent and as a teacher, the other side of that, and that is the importance of parent or teacher, or let's just call it adult-led play, and likewise the benefits on that adult-child bond, whether it's parent-child, teacher-child, whatever, that beloved adult and the child need to have a good relationship, and the role that even adult-led play can have in that. So hopefully it's obvious that these considerations are universally true, whether we're talking about Waldorf homeschooling or summer camps or raising a child in the home, whatever. Play is ubiquitous, or should be. And so this is going to apply to many aspects of our lives together. So let's start with the obvious, the basic baseline. What is it we're talking about when we say play? If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find some version of this definition, which is basically activity of enjoyment or activity of recreation. And to me, the key word there is activity, which has the root of active. So when I refer to play from now on in this presentation, I am not including play such as might be used when we refer to a digital device or a game, a PlayStation, a game on the computer or whatever. I am not talking about that kind of play. I will say that board games are at least some activity, but for the most part, I'm really talking about active play, where our bodies are active, where we actually engage in the world around us with our whole beings. So just to make that clear, let's proceed. So child-directed play and child development. One of the great things that this Dr. Ginsburg quotes is that when children play by themselves, these are some of the things that are being developed quite naturally just by the child getting out and playing in all sorts of settings. They develop their imaginations. We see how children naturally engage their imaginations when they're not overstimulated. They develop their coordination, their physical senses, their balance, their fine motor skills, their gross motor skills, their spatial orientation, body awareness, bilateral integration, dexterity, strength, and cognitive and emotional development. That's a long list of terms, but if you think about each one, you can see how no matter what kind of active play the child might be engaged in, there are a number of those things being developed simultaneously. Meanwhile, whether they're playing by themselves or in groups, they are learning about sharing, negotiation, boundaries, conflict resolution, overcoming difficulties, self-advocacy, decision-making, and they discover their own interests. Some of these things seem so self-obvious, but we have to remember that these are things that children need to learn as they grow into themselves. Now, to achieve these things, where we're just engaging all these aspects of child development, and we're helping them learn these things about themselves and the interaction with others, I thought, well, what kind of Waldorf play set, if I were to just sell a basic play set to Waldorf families, what would it be? This is what it would be. A few cloths or silks. We all know that silks can often be associated with Waldorf education. A few cloths, a few silks. Silks are great, but if it's just a cotton cloth, fine. Some sticks, some rocks, some wooden blocks, a bucket or maybe two, and some hats. That's it. That's all that the young child needs. It's nice if they have some open space, but I'm not going to sell people open space. Find some open space, go to some open space, and use those things, those very simple things, most of which I wouldn't bother selling you, of course, because you can find them in nature. There's really so little else that's needed to engage a child in these playful activities that will have all those many benefits, both for the self and interactions socially with others. In my own experience as a parent, I've built a lot of things. I like to build stuff, and I've built a lot of things and made a lot of things and purchased a lot of things for my children. I have two, a boy and a girl, who are now both in their 20s. And when they were very young, I took some logs and put them together and dumped in 3 or 4 bags of sand. Total construction cost for this sandbox was probably less than $40, maybe less than $30. And I have to say, to this day, it's probably the best thing I ever made for my children. They loved it. They played in it. They engaged the most imaginatively in that play box, that little sandbox, than if I compare, for example, a few years later when I built them a very expensive and very nice tree house that I thought would be the ultimate play space for them. They played in that treehouse a few times, but it didn't have the same kind of flexibility and opportunity for their imaginations. And it was kind of quickly dismissed. It wasn't much of a play area for my children. So I think we can all keep that in mind. Some of us know it, and yet sometimes it's nice to be reminded that it's those simple things. It really is those simple things that engage the children the most and the most meaningfully. So now let's turn our attention to child-directed play and the parent-child bond. What is happening between us, the adults, and the children when we are present, particularly for this bond to be enhanced? It's those moments when we're not just sending them out to play by themselves, but when we make ourselves available and present to their play and let them be the initiators. They are the leaders of this type of play. Again, the author of the article I referred to, Kenneth Ginsburg, says this: parents who play along with their children have the unique opportunity to glimpse into the child's world, to learn to communicate more effectively with the children, and they are given another setting in which to offer gentle, nurturing guidance. So in other words, when we allow the child to initiate the play, to guide where it's going, to bring in the imaginative situation, we get to see with insight what that child is living into, what level of consciousness they use to engage the world, to understand themselves, to understand others, and how they communicate or relate to all those other beings in the world, imaginative and real, even for ourselves. So it gives us a real opportunity to understand our children on a different level. And especially when you think of children who might be less verbal or even pre-verbal, they're just barely talking or barely learning to speak, we can still gain insights into that child's character. And those insights can serve us as parents when we are in those moments where we're attempting to guide them in certain ways or engage them in other ways. We know those things that they like. We know those things that they're naturally inclined to do. Again, I'll say it. I may be speaking to the choir here. Many of you probably know these things intuitively, innately. But in today's world where we are called upon or can be called upon to be busier and busier as adults, these types of things are less intuitive than they once were. That's my belief. And I think it's been affirmed, that belief, in just a couple of decades of working as a teacher. I've seen dramatic changes in the families with whom I've worked. So whether it's just affirming those things or reminding you of something that we all need to keep in mind, I hope that these messages will serve their purpose. With my own children, I played with both of my children. My son was the older, and I often let them lead because I was so interested in just playing with them, and I didn't know how to lead young children at that point. So my son loved trucks and trains. I mean, he also wore skirts and put his hair up in ponytails. So I was never like trying to confine him to any type of gender specific play. He just loved trucks and trains. And I learned a lot about him and his character. He had such, and still has such, a talent for seeing how physical things can fit together and work together. He became, just for the last few years, he's been a motorcycle mechanic, and it's no surprise to me at all. And I could see that potential from very early in his life. On the other hand, my daughter, with whom I played, and we would play trucks and trains sometimes, but she also liked to dress up and play with dolls more than my son. That was just their natural tendency. One of the things she loved to do from a very early age was to look at photo albums. She would just spend hours sometimes looking at photo albums, including some of our older school albums, looking at children she didn't know personally. And she knew those faces so well that sometimes she would recognize people out in public that she had never actually known. She would say, "Daddy, that girl went to our school." It was remarkable. And she is a very observant child. She picks up on behavioral patterns very quickly in others. It's no surprise to me that right now, at least, we'll see if it changes, but right now she's majoring in anthropology in school. So we can have these types of insights with our children from a very young age. Okay. I'll finish up quickly so we don't waste any time. I know I'm going just a few minutes over. I'll try to finish up quickly. So I want us to remember that while child-directed play is very important, we should not diminish the importance of adult-directed play. That's a lot of what we do in Waldorf education. The teacher leads play. So much of Waldorf education is engaging in artistic activity so that we're processing information and even academic lessons on really deep levels, really integrating it into the whole human being in meaningful ways. So anytime you're doing the arts, it's important for us to remember we're playing. We're not producing products. We're not trying to produce the perfect painting or the perfect song. We're playing with these arts. And the more we can do that, the more that children remember to do that as well. And then everybody has a lot more fun. And actually, when we're having a lot more fun, we're learning more. We're growing more. We are becoming more human. So circle, review, the class play for the year, little skits that we can do throughout the year when we're reviewing lessons or stories, paintings, songs, so many different ways we, the teacher or the parent teacher, or even the parent at home who's just reciting a nursery rhyme, the simplest ways that we bring these things to children playfully and artistically engages the child in ways that we can see are helpful to them. The child may not naturally be a singer or a painter or an actor or any other artistic form, but we can help them play in those ways and thus feel more comfortable in different settings with different people doing different things that are creative and beneficial to their development. We know that we can balance those things as the adults, and we certainly do that in Waldorf teaching. And we can also show them as ourselves as models how to not take things too seriously. So, quick little story. When I was a brand new teacher, it was a big deal to set up painting in a classroom. It's a lot of different materials. You've got to get set up just right. And then you're trying to get maybe 24 students to paint together. And this is all liquid, watercolor painting. So one day I've got these second graders setting up painting with me. This is only my second year of teaching. I'm still a little nervous about the whole process because so many things can get out of hand quickly. And sure enough, on this occasion, one of the children bumped a desk. The lids were already off of the watercolor paints. All 6 watercolor painting jars fell to the floor with the water jar, and we had a huge puddle of 6 different colors. This, I knew immediately, is going to take at least an hour to clean up. This is a crazy mess. But I knew in the moment as well, I think maybe my angel was talking to me saying, don't freak out. This is actually incredibly beautiful. And so we all just gathered around this puddle of colors and watched it for about 20 minutes as it continued to spread across the floor and the colors would mix and swirl. It was an amazing moment. And I have to believe that ability to accept a mistake or an oops, a big oops, to accept it and actually try to see the beauty in it was a gift to those students. It was certainly a gift to me. And that's something that we can model strongly for children so they don't take themselves too seriously or take moments too seriously. And then lastly, of course, and I hope that story bridges the gap. There's not just how we can help them with their learning, but what that does when we lead the play to strengthen that adult-child bond. And in Waldorf education, I think Rudolf Steiner did a wonderful job of encapsulating the nature of that bond with this term, that the teacher or even the parent needs to have that balance of being the loving authority. And when they're balanced together, neither one of those causes problems. If we are nothing but loving, there is a chance that we become too permissive. We create entitled children. We spoil them, to use an old-fashioned term. We're not really guiding them as the adult ego needs to guide them. On the other hand, if we're too authoritarian or too authoritative, then we're strict, we're cold. We create children that lack that warmth of soul to truly connect to the other human being. But together, these things balance us in a way that we present a wonderful model of humanity to the child, and we help them grow into that in themselves. They know that there are times, for example, that it's time to play and it's time to play freely. There are other times when it's time to play in a particular way, and there are still other times when we have to work. We have to do some things that are not always just naturally enjoyable, but we know that it's important and we need to get things done. The adult models that with this balance of loving authority. And when children experience that authentic balance within the adult, they can have real respect and love and reverence for another being, which again, I'll refer to Rudolf Steiner, the founder of Waldorf education. He said, it's this reverence for another being that is the very first prerequisite for anyone who would walk the path of spiritual development. Regardless of what religion you may talk about, regardless of your spiritual beliefs, any type of development of our higher selves requires an experience of reverence for others. It makes sense when we think about it, but that starts, we give them that first opportunity to experience that pure childlike reverence when we ourselves are worthy models. And that doesn't have to be heavy. That can happen even in play. Okay, so thank you. I hope that was helpful. And now I want to introduce our special guest, Lynne Poirier. Lynne Poirier has been, well, she's a parent of 2 adult children, and she has been a Waldorf teacher longer than me. So this is over 2 decades. I think we're close to 25 years now that you've been teaching, Lynn, somewhere around there. And even more impressively, I think Lynn has taught a couple of classes all the way through the journey, 1st through 8th, as well as picking up classes at different points along that journey. And Lynn has spent the last, is it 3 years? 3 years teaching in kindergarten. So Lynn has that wonderful broad spectrum of experience from the early childhood programs all the way through the first 8 grades of Waldorf education. So now I have a few questions to lead Lynn with some discussion. And on that note,
let me say hello to everybody.
Okay.
And I wish I knew how old your children. I'm sure they're varied ages, but I was thinking so much about what Rev was saying, and how so many different, as they grow older, there are so many different ways to apply this sense of play, and whether it be guided or left to the children's own guidance, and all that is it's always determined upon how old they are too. So go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, and before I start, I just want to say, we're going to have the last part of this meeting devoted to your questions. So if you have questions that come up, I may ask them, so we'll see. But if not, Brian is collecting them. So write them into the chats, and Brian will collect them, and we'll cover all of them, I hope. And if not, as many as possible after this. So here we go.
So just to jump in there real quick, a few people have put in, Abigail has a 5-year-old son. Yeah. Melissa has 2 boys, 5 and 3 months. Laura has 3 and almost 6 years old. We got another, I think, Laura with a 7, 5, 3 and 7 month. Shelby with 1, 3, 5 and 7. So
okay, busy mommies.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So as a parent and a teacher, Lynn, what have you seen that is more or less universally true about children's play?
I would have to say that from my own children, so they're 31 and 34 now, and when observing their play in their play groups up till now, I see one of the universal aspects is that they play out their environment. So they play out what they see. So we are their environment, especially when your children are very young. You yourself and what you set up for their environment, their physical environment, is what they play out. So, and I was going to say, you mentioned work, Rev, and work. If your child, if you start this way when your child's very young, work and play can be seamless. The children want to do what we do. So what children would do, for example, in school 25 years ago is different than what is done today, in that there's been such an increase in technology. For example, this is one thing, that I even see children in groups. So I'm a teacher right now in the kindergarten, although I'm going into 6th grade next year. But in this last year, there were a couple children who would play and with have a little block right here with one hand, and they'd be playing with their friends and have their phone on their heads. So because that's what they see in their environment. Oftentimes the children these days, I never saw this before. I did used to see, because children are always so interested in, I'm using a pen, but children are always so interested, as I said, in what their adults are doing. So back in the day, I'd see them picking up their bananas at lunchtime and talking to one another. You know, this is about a kindergarten age. I started in the kindergarten that very early on. And so they'd talk to one another through their bananas. Hey, over there. And now I see them with their lunch boxes open in a Waldorf school. So, you know, it is what it is. They'd open up their lunch boxes and that was their laptop. So they'd be typing as they're eating lunch. So that's a different way. Yeah, that's a different way of playing. But the play itself, the universal part of play itself is that children are completely immersed in it. And they do play out what they need to either work out or what they see in the world, in their environment. That's what I see that is consistent and universal.
So I think you're sort of bridging toward where I want to go next, and that is the modern times and the challenges that it brings to families. So if you could speak about just a few, maybe one or two examples of challenges you see for new families today with young children, and then follow that with what advice you have for those families. It may just be advice you've given to families recently, could be real-time examples or general statements of advice you have, either one.
Okay. Yeah, challenges are the busy schedules we have, more so than we used to, and trying to, I think fear is one. So parents are afraid that with all that is presented to us, primarily through media, in how to raise children or what to offer to children, I think parents are afraid that they're not doing the best they can. And there's even this term professional parenting, to where, you know, parents need to make sure that they're, as early as possible, their young children are in, you know, dance lessons and soccer, piano lessons, extra, you know, learning over the computer and things like that. So that is, so that's the I mean, your question is what's changed really, and what are the challenges in that? I would say that, so the worry that parents have, first of all, kind of creates that environment. I mean, children pick up on your environment and you don't have to be saying anything. You can just be holding yourself or having a look of tension on your face, and your child knows that you are uncomfortable or worried. So I think I think what I would give as advice is to think about what you really value, what you would really value in another human being. You have a short amount of time to be with your young children. And when you are there with that child, to be present, but not necessarily always, as Rev was speaking about, not necessarily involved. That's also a nice way to be, is involved, so you can actually really be creating that bond, but also just present to listen to how they play. It's nice if you have one child, to find playmates, you know, and parents with whom you share values. But to have that opportunity for your children to play and for you just to observe, you know, eyes in the back of the head kind of thing. And you can be, as a kindergarten teacher, I sit and I'll be doing something like knitting, or I'll be weeding when we're outside. But I'm nearby so that I can observe without really even looking sometimes, but just listening to what's happening over here. And if need be, I can intervene, but it's not necessarily so much of me saying what should happen, but even in asking, if I notice that there's an escalation in, there's a discordant moment, and I go in and I just ask, what's happening here? What are you wanting to do? And what are you wanting to do? Oftentimes the children will, in just listening to one another, come up with a nice mutual idea, something that works for everybody. And that having that social interaction through play is one of the things that is the most important part of play. So I would advise parents to be present, but not, as I said, not necessarily involved. Oftentimes I live near a park, and I'll walk by and I walk my puppy dog, and there will be children playing together, and parents all about. And oftentimes actually, a parent pushing somebody on a swing, but he or she is on the phone. So there's not really a presence there. So I would advise people to actually schedule themselves out with their phone and their computer time, just like a work day would be scheduled, and have there be times when you're there for your child, when you're not distracted.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think some of the best advice I ever got was from Dr. Susan Johnson, who's a anthroposophical doctor, which is the same stream of philosophy that produced Waldorf education. And she said that parents should schedule at least a half hour every day when the phone is off or put away, where nothing at all will interrupt the parent's focus with the child. And I wasn't always good about doing that every day in the daytime, but I read to my children every single night in their growing up, and it was at least 30 minutes that we were reading. Oftentimes I was beginning to jibber jabber because I was going to sleep while reading. And that was such a valuable time. My kids still remember it. I still value it. It was absolutely essential in keeping our bond close. So I think that's sage advice. And lastly, I have one more question for you, Lynn. Could you share, maybe just so we can be thinking in context of what those valuable memories are from our own childhoods when we look back as adults? Could you share what are some of your earliest and most beloved memories from play in your own childhood?
Yeah, I have a lot of them. And I think about this too when I'm watching children in the kindergarten yard. I grew up I was a young child in Staten Island, New York, before it was really built up. And I lived right across the street from a wooded area. And sorry, that's my dog. My parents, hold on, let me just close this door. My parents didn't mind that I walked over there. And we had a sweet little neighborhood. So, and I know that things are different today in terms of feeling comfortable about your children being out in the neighborhood. But I had a lot of experience with the natural world. And really, back in those days, parents would rather the child be out doing something else. They were comfortable enough. She was doing something at home. My dad was off to work. So my friends and I would collect, I remember collecting daddy long legs and having a little daddy long legs, family, and making places for the daddy long legs to live. We'd collect pollywogs, tadpoles, a lot of that kind of thing, dig holes, play with mud, the things that children still do. That's another universal thing. Everybody, if children can get their hands on a sandbox, a mud puddle, they're going to start making things. We'll set up all kinds of things. Well, throughout, I remember when my own children were younger, I know that wasn't your question, but we had a nice little swing set, nice little play structure. But what they love to do is, when I forgot to turn the sprinklers off, is go play in the mud and make stuff out of mud. Had I thought, as parents, young parents, you're thinking, okay, got to do the right thing. Anyway, a lot of that, I had a lot of experience being able to climb, dig, move, as Rev was saying. I loved climbing up I love climbing things, and I loved bars. So even when I went to elementary school, then I was just always twirling on bars or swinging, and Steiner talks about the lower senses as being the basis for bodily, human development in the physical form, and how twirling or rolling and all that is so important. That's why children love to roll down hills or twirl themselves on swings, and all that. So yeah, that was some of my experience. Those are my experiences that I can remember.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We have some time left now for some questions from you all, if you have any. I've seen a couple come in, but I'll let Brian cue them up for us. And Lynn and I might just take turns answering from our different perspectives, and we'll see where this goes.
All right. Well, our first question is from Melissa. Could you briefly speak about the benefits of delayed academics to people who don't know anything about Waldorf? How does she explain this to local community?
Yeah, that is a great question, first of all, and one that we have to address constantly in Waldorf education. So it's probably the best possible term, but I wouldn't say it's the perfect term for how we view it. Delayed academics. It's the best possible term because there's truth to it. Relation, if we compare what we're doing in Waldorf education to what's happening in many other educational systems, it seems that our academic goals or milestones are delayed. If I were to flip it the other way, I would say that my professional opinion as an educator of over 20 years is that many of those academic goals and milestones and standards that are set in other educational systems are premature. They're being pushed down too early in this strange hypnotic trance that seems to be perpetuated on new families and new parents, that faster and earlier is better, which has been proven by so many studies to not actually bear out. If it were true, then the United States would, as a whole, would probably rank much higher in terms of countries' academic learning tests or otherwise within the world, but it doesn't test out that way. What we're actually trying to do, regardless of how it compares to other school systems, is to work with the child's actual development. So what we see, what Rudolf Steiner knew over 100 years ago, what he recommended was that until the change of teeth, until the actual baby teeth begin to fall out and the adult teeth begin to grow in, the child should not be engaged in head activity, meaning abstract learning. That's why in our early childhood programs, we don't have academic lessons. We don't have any of those strange goals. I say strange, and I'll stick by it. I think they're strange goals to try and have certain academic standards that are being met by children before that developmental stage. They need to be playing. They need to be engaged in activities that are for the whole human being, not simply for the head. Those activities of the whole human being are actually preparing by engaging the whole body. Its coefficient, you could say, neurally, is that so many neural networks are being myelinated for the future to be even more efficient in learning those academic lessons when it's time. So we do start to bring the academic lessons in the grades, and even then we see just by the natural progression. I'm happy to teach a child to read in first grade. I'm happy to do that if and when I see that that child is naturally ready and able, not because Mr. and Mrs. Jones are telling me that their child needs to learn how to read right now. That is not the reason to teach a child to read. As long as I have made sure that their capacities are in place, meaning there are no problems with their vision or their visual tracking, there's no problem with their auditory processing, they are capable. As long as they are capable, then I'm looking to see, I'm presenting language arts lessons from the beginning of first grade, but I'm always watching to see when is it they're starting to show that piqued interest and that they're growing in their abilities to start to recognize that sounds are associated with certain symbols and that a string of symbols can become a word and they can begin to decode those words because they have good phonemic awareness that's being coupled in the right time of their development with visual processing so that they can begin to decode these symbols and actually read. That's just the reading development of a child. It's similar when we talk about being able to write, actually encode rather than decode. When they encode their language into writing, that's a similar process. I'm still looking for those little signs. Same with math. When they are able to take their experience of the order and pattern of the world around them and in their experiences of rhythm and movement, of counting things in the world, the more they grow in their abilities, the more I can bring to them to lead them further and further along that learning path. So again, just to tie it up in a little bow, it's oversimplified to say it, but the heart of it is that we're looking at the child themselves. We start with the child in Waldorf education, and then we bring the curriculum to them at the right time of their development. We do not start with a curriculum and force it onto the child. That's the best way I can sum it up, and maybe Lynn has something more eloquent to say.
I'm not sure about eloquent, but I just wanted the mailman to go because my dog barking again. Well, I was going to say that it's not delayed learning. I mean, they're learning so much by themselves. Sorry, everybody, about the dog. But just to watch children in the kindergarten yard playing with mechanical advantage, or children asking to help me with the folding of the little painting cloths in class. And I'll say, go ahead and fold 10 and put them over here. And so they'll count out 10, or we can count out 10 together. There's so many ways you can together do things in a fun way that are academic. And we have in Waldorf school, we have seen children come in just burnt out on academics in 5th grade or whatever, because they've had too much of that too early. I'm going to finish here and just put my dog in the other room.
So we do have more questions. I wanted to make a comment. If we don't get to all of these questions here, we will definitely respond to them in our follow-up email. And so our next question, I wanted to start with actually a comment from Veronica, was talking about that she found that when she was engaged in domestic activities, that kept her more grounded, and her children were more content in their play. But when she was talking on the phone or was on the computer, doing more heady things, that drew attention elsewhere, and her children would be more anxious and more demanding of her attention. And that kind of leads into, I'm going to skip Brittany Bertini. I will come back to her question, but Maria said, how can I engage my children in home chores Usually I do chores on my own and don't know how to integrate them.
Can I speak to that, Mr. Rev? Yeah, so if they're, especially if they haven't looked at chores yet as being a negative thing, they, like I said, they want to do what you do. So you'll find that if you are washing the, with a good attitude, if you're washing the dishes and involve them, and they can do that with you, or you're folding or sweeping and they have a little broom of their own. I mean, they really do enjoy doing something with you. And then after a while, it might be that you divide and conquer. They get a little older and you say, how about you do this and I'll do this? And next time we could switch. But they, yeah, if you, and maybe, it's already become something of a chore or something that has a negative connotation. But if you can begin by just making it fun, let's just do this together. Let it be fun. That's the way to transition that, and not make it too much, not make it so that you're having to clean the garage for 2 hours with them or something like that. It's start with baby steps. If you need to alter it from something that wasn't working.
Next question.
Yeah.
So Brittany asked, my 5-year-old is starting to drop his nap. What are some quiet body and self-directed activities you might recommend at home?
Lynn, I will defer to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on what you have. I know I used to have a huge jar of buttons, colorful buttons that my children loved. And I would just, it was kind of a special thing. Can we play with the buttons? So now and again, they play with the butt. I pour the buttons out and they just put buttons into different, in different color groups, or line them up into little tracks for their cars. There's always art. If you have art materials out and you have a space where it won't get damaged by any of the materials, you can put out things like glue and paper, and as long as there's something that you can clean up later. No permanent markers, of course. If there's, if you can be outside with anything, the children love to explore, look for bugs, there's so many things that children love to do that is kind of quiet, as long as they, I'm not sure, is that Brittany? Is it one child that you have? That's it. If your child is used to you being the guider of play, that gets a little bit trickier.
I have 2. So so my 2-year-old obviously still takes his nap, but Hunter, I'm looking for something. I can tell that his body needs the quiet time.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like something sitting at a table possibly, but in a way that's, of crafting. Somebody recommended beeswax.
Okay. Yeah. So beeswax or beading. If you have a jar of pretty beads and a string, yeah, an art table would be nice. If you have a place where you can just set up different kinds of crafts and art, glue, scissors. I'm surprised at how many children come into kindergarten and don't know how to cut yet with scissors. So they just love to explore all that. So if you have the means to set that up, and it doesn't take a lot, it can just be things you find in the thrift store or outside, and then just put them all on the table.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one recommendation to add, and it's not always for every child, but it's just something you can maybe try. Remedial therapists often use something called the burrito roll or burrito wrap, and that's just where you take a blanket And the child, we used to do this, my sister and I used to do this on our own. We just thought it was fun. We would just roll up in the blanket. And sometimes we would stay there, and sometimes we would roll over each other while we were both in the blankets. But that is actually a really helpful thing for a child to feel peacefully held. It creates a kind of a membrane around them. It also engages their whole body sense of touch. And by rolling, that's just a healthy thing to do for the vestibular system, the inner ears rolling around. And so sometimes just showing that to children, if they don't do it naturally themselves, once they experience it, some children may be afraid to be rolled up like that at first, but over time they become more comfortable with it. And it has a lot of just natural benefits, as well as they can even get to the place where they want to roll up and actually stay there. Whether they go to sleep or not, they just like that feeling. And that can last for a little while in replace of a nap.
And if you want to be involved, you can always do the chores then too, like folding or washing or sweeping with your 5-year-old.
Yes, he loves
Okay.
chores. Thank you, Rev. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Sure.
So Jennifer was wondering about further reading, learning courses regarding child development according to Steiner.
Ooh, well, yeah, I'm sure there are a lot more of those available than I'm aware of. There are certainly some training centers that you can go to physically. There's one in the Bay Area, for instance, the Bay Area Center of Waldorf Teacher Training. And I think that they offer courses that are not just for the teacher training path, sometimes just engaging parents or those who are interested in learning more. And online, I can't even begin to tell you, it's not quite where we're focused at this point with Simply Waldorf. Because it does go so deep, and there are so many aspects to the things that Steiner said about child development. There are certainly some great books, such as The Kingdom of Childhood, which was just a great book for me to read early on, written by Rudolf Steiner. It's not very long, but it's a great book. And then I'm sure Lynn has even more to say on this.
I just sent a chat. I think I sent it. Did I send it? There we go. Sharifa Oppenheimer, she writes really, she's a Waldorf person. She writes lovely books about, and they go over the science of play even, and all different kinds of things. She's a great resource. And also it used to be that many people read Isabella Wyatt's books to their children, the 7-Year Wonder book, and some of the books she's written. And those are so special, I think. They're a must-have for every family. And there's even a way, something she describes in the book about putting out a little, I forget what she calls it, but like a little journal next to the child's bedside every night. Something that you can write in and share with the child. Anyway, Isabella Wyatt, I didn't write that down, but that's if you can write that down, everybody, I'll actually write. Wonderful resource for books for you and your child.
Okay, so there's definitely more questions than we're going to be able to answer. So like I said, we will do our best to answer those in the follow-up email. I just want to make sure, Rev, did you have any closing piece you'd like to say? Or we can do one more question if you want to do one more question.
I wonder, I don't know Lynn's availability. I'm happy to keep answering questions since we're recording it. We're going to send this recording out, and might be the most efficient way to do it. And then those who had a strict 1 o'clock cutoff time, you'll be able to check out of this meeting, but you'll still receive the recording. So if you miss a little bit here at the end, you will be able to see those answers. And then those of you who just want to stay and hear it live, you're welcome to stay too. I don't know about Lynn's timing, but I'm willing to do that. Otherwise, my only closing comment is just to say thank you so much for coming. It's really been a pleasure to have you all, and it's nice to hear your questions.
I'm free.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep going with questions, and yeah. So we'll with our follow-up email, you'll get the whole recording, along with some questions for feedback, so we can keep making improvements on our future webinars and our future courses. So let's jump right back.
Can I say one more thing? Lest we go on and on forever, though, I would like to say that we stop right now with whatever questions we have. Those are the ones we're going to address here on the live recording. And then if you have more questions, by all means, please send them to us. We're always happy to answer questions. But for the sake of this recording, let's not just make it go on and on.
Okay. I'll try to mark where that is.
Okay.
Okay. I think we are on this one. Make sure I didn't miss that one. Okay, so okay. My almost 6-year-old has been really interested in firefighters since he was a toddler. His father and I have not done any intentional introduction to firefighting, but this is what he does. Big part of his playtime. We try to bring variety of activities, but firefighting and rescue missions are the top and will occupy at least 70% of his time. Do you have any insights of what to do with that? And what is the approach when they are so focused on one activity? Do you see any problem with it? He has introduced it to my 3-year-old as well. And now we have two firefighters in the home.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay. Oh, I have a boy like that in the kindergarten. He loves trains. Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought about this child so much because he really cannot get his mind off of trains. And I'm wondering if it's the same with your firefighter. And then I wonder, why does somebody come in with such a propensity for one thing? And it's just a question. You have to wonder, is there something there for that child that's so strong already? So, I wouldn't stifle it, but you're asking how to maybe expand that horizon. I guess, I mean, right off the top of my head, I would think, what are the other things that maybe you could go from firefighting to do, so what do firefighters do in the world? I happen to have known a firefighter really well. And you know what he did second best is cook. In fact, that's my neighbor. Sorry about all the noise at my house. It might be interesting actually to take that little guy to a fire station and have him meet some of the personalities of firefighters. Often these guys are really gregarious. And I tell you, you get firefighters together and they all become good cooks. I'm sure about that. It's happened. I mean, okay, I'm not so sure, but in this one station, everybody became a really good cook. So maybe he just needs to see what a real firefighter, who the human is behind that idea. And maybe they take him on a little ride or something. It could open up his horizons a bit.
Yeah, I would just
go ahead.
I would just add that in terms of the concern, trust your intuition. There's no expert that can tell you from the outside, this is going to be a problem. Nobody knows. I have a cousin who grew up very similar to the child that Lynn just described. He was just fascinated with trains his whole life. He is now a conductor. He is now an engineer for a railroad. And it was almost obsessive, you could say, when he was young, and yet it has turned out to be his destiny in life. And it's as if he knew it from the moment he came to this earth. So in that regard, I would just say, trust your intuition. You are the closest beings to this child coming into this world. You're the ones who actually know, and you'll know if it seems unhealthy or that it's impairing their ability to engage in other meaningful ways and other other kinds of play. Yeah, just trust yourselves. And I totally wholeheartedly agree with Lynn's recommendation to meet some human firefighters, put the human element into it.
Great. From Laura, as we are on our first grade journey with my 7-year-old, my 5 and 3-year-old love to sit by and listen to our main lesson. I want to encourage independent play for my young kids. I want to shield them from the academics, but it is becoming hard to do so. Any ideas on how to do this better?
Boy, well, I'm going to say a little something, and then maybe Lynn has more to add. I understand the desire, and yet to balance that too, I would also just suggest that our children come to us with an intention, including the order in which they're born. I believe that this is my own belief, so take it for what it's worth to you. I believe that we choose our families, we choose our situations, we choose how to incarnate in these lives because we know that it will bring those sets of circumstances, beneficial and challenging, that we need to grow in this incarnation. So I believe myself that your children chose the order in which to be born, and that it's part of your younger ones' karmic destinies to be exposed a little more to those lessons of the eldest child. At the same time, you don't want to just now put everybody in first grade. So there's legitimate reasons to limit that exposure and how much they actually engage in that abstract or academic learning. Now, for that, boy, to give you real recommendations, I would have to be in your home and actually see what's the situation, what can we manage here. But some of the things we've already said about providing opportunities for the child-led play, leaving out, a table with craft materials, that can be one way. But if they're just fixated and you have to actually, deflect their interest to something else actively, that's really requiring you as the adult to sort of split yourself, and that's not going to work out so well. So it's a real challenge. It almost asks for either another adult to be involved, maybe, or you just allow the children to be exposed to it as they would have been in the old schoolhouses on the frontier. They will be exposed to some older lessons, but that doesn't mean that we're engaging them actively in those lessons. That's my best.
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with Rev in that the children come in a certain order, and so there's something to that for sure. I would also say though that if you have something that's available for the younger ones nearby, they will take up what they really are able to take up. So your younger ones won't take in the curriculum as your older one will. And they will, unless it's becoming a taboo thing for them to be sitting there, then of course they're going to want to sit there even more. But if it's just kind of leave them alone, and they're likely to get bored because it's not really their thing yet. Or they'll just be interested and take it in the way they do. Maybe they can have their own little piece of paper and draw something, or do their writing. I know I've watched children, I'll be writing something to another teacher and they'll watch me do handwriting, script, and they'll want to do it too. And they'll just do, the little scribbles, and yeah, it's just, they do what they can do. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah.
But probably the thing you don't want to do is tell them they can't. They don't want to more.
Great. From Melissa, would audio stories be considered a good option for quiet time for the little ones?
My recommendation is I would not engage young children in audio stories until they can read themselves. And even then, I tried to wait for any of that digital media with my children until they were past the 9-year change. So at least 10 years old. And really, the longer the better. You can wait for any of that media, electronic media, to be part of the lifestyle. It's just, on the one hand, the media itself, an audio book, an audio story being read to your child, on the one hand, it's you can't say it's all that harmful in and of itself. My greater concern is what it's doing. That is teaching your child, oh, there's this other source. There's this electronic, there's media now. I know how it works. I can just push play, I can push pause, or mommy can push play, mommy can push pause. It's a slippery slope, and it is very alluring to the child because it's so slick. The stuff we've created now is just so streamlined and smooth, and in a sense, from a certain point of view, it's elegant and beautiful. It's really wonderful. But for the young child, they have no filter to deal with the enticement of it. And so we have young people who begin, not so auspiciously, you might say, but they begin their exposure to it, and quickly, like I said, it's a slippery slope, and you find them then wanting their own devices very soon after, because everybody else has them, and I know how they work, and they're really fun, and I don't have to wait on mommy to finish doing the dishes so that I can hear a story. I can just go to my room and hit play. And now the child becomes more and more isolated, not more and more connected to us. The media will make them more and more isolated from us as parents, and nothing more so than when they receive their first cell phone. Even with all the parent controls we can put on it, it is a difficult task to keep them engaged in the family once they have their own personal device. I know that's not where you're going with your question about the audio story, but I'm suggesting that it is a gateway toward that, and that's my biggest concern.
I would like to add that I'm starting to get to know the 6th grade class I'm taking next in the fall. And there are a couple children in that class who have only listened to audiobooks. And now that they are, and they're already coming on 12 years old, and they don't like to read. There's more, it takes too much effort. So, and then there's also the child who is, has reading challenges, who is helped along at that age by having an audiobook as well. But I wouldn't start it either. And there's a whole thing, I think Ellie wrote in just recently. I wanted to go to this just briefly with this question. Our music teacher at our school speaks about, even just with music, just listening to music on the radio and listening to live music is so different when it comes to the process of our own hearing, how we take it in. And I think it's the same thing with an audiobook. There's such a difference in the sound of a human voice just coming right to you and the sound of an electronic voice, no matter how good they are. I like to listen to audiobooks too, love the English speakers or some, that people with different accents, but I'm an adult now and I can choose. I also love to read, but I can see how it's, so much easier just to listen. So I would probably, for those reasons, not start that either, because it's hard to go back on something that will take some more effort when you see, oh, I can just read, I can just listen. I don't have to put any effort into this. And then you have, then you have a child who you think might have reading challenges, and it might just be that he or she just doesn't want to put out that extra effort.
Yeah. And if I can come back to it and add a little more in terms of being positive, there are picture books out there. We used to have a book called something about Carl. I forget. Carl was this dog. And it was just a picture book. There were no words at all. So every time my children flipped through this book about Carl, they could create their own stories with these pictures. And every time they read it, they could make the story different if they wanted to. Or I say read it. Every time they looked through it, they could make it different. And then, of course, nothing replaces, and I mean nothing replaces, when we read stories to children. telling them stories or reading with them. Reading with them is fun because it has that added benefit of us being the model of actually reading. So that we open the book, they're looking at the text, even if they can't interpret any of it yet. They're seeing that we have an enjoyment of this process of physically reading books, which will be a great gift to them later on.
Yeah.
Great. And I think this is our last question from Crystal. How do we as educators entice children to copy text from the blackboard? I'm a new teacher and noticed that some children, grade 2, dread copying a short text from the board. It is recommended as part of the curriculum goals to practice writing. They have a drawing which they need to copy as well, but sometimes they would like to draw their own interpretation of the story. However, my mentor teacher states they need to draw exactly as the board presented. What would you recommend in order to avoid some children dreading the main block lesson?
May I say something about the copying first? Okay, some children, if you have a child who has difficulty copying text from the board, you first of all might want to make sure that that child's eyes are functioning correctly, because some children actually do have that situation, and teachers will actually write it down for that child and have it be next to him or her. And Rev, you can go on with that too.
No, that was exactly where I was going to start. That's a super important point. And as a new teacher, I sometimes didn't always remember to make absolutely sure that their visual and auditory processing was completely sound before, that those things need to be ruled out in terms of being factors in difficulty or resistance in learning. Super, super important. And then beyond that, I would just say, it brings us back. It's a wonderful last question, because I think it brings us back to the theme of our presentation, which is play. The important thing with getting children to do things like this, like copying from the board, is to make it playful. So it may not always feel that way, but we can gain some positive momentum if we engage playfully with them. So I would maybe right before the writing portion, which they're going to copy from the board, I would engage in maybe a little fun game with them where you can, and this leads to a bigger activity, which I'm not going to go into, but I'm just going to give a little example. You can put a cloth or a piece of paper, a poster board up on the board, that and under it or behind it, you draw a little symbol. Let's just assume it's a little spiral. Okay, and then you remove the covering, let the children see it for a certain period of time. Maybe it's 3 seconds, maybe it's 7 seconds, whatever you think works for your children. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but not impossible. And then you cover it again and you say, okay, now you all, or you child, try to recreate what you just saw. They don't get to recreate it while you've uncovered it. You just let them and encourage them and actually require them to focus. So pencils are down. They just focus on the visual processing. They're really being intent and focused on what they see. And then when we cover it, you say, go. And now they recreate that spiral to the best of their ability. And you can do that with a few different little playful symbols. They don't need to be actual words. It can be, a square with a circle inside it, for example. And you'll see quickly what they're able to do, and you start to adjust the level of challenge to meet them appropriately. And what we've done by engaging that way is we've created something that is playful. It's fun. Now they're associating things that we're writing on the board and things that they're copying from the board with a fun activity. And then I would slowly transition to actually writing letters or numbers or even short little words. You see how I'm doing it? So I'm starting in the playful area and I'm slowly transitioning it closer and closer to what I'm wanting to accomplish with them, where they're actually copying words from the board for their main lesson work. And it's the same thing with, well, it's not the same thing. It's very similar with drawing. The importance with drawing, I agree with your mentor, by the way. There is definitely some value and importance in them copying the artistic work just as at that age, just as we have presented it to them on the board. And at the same time, there is great value in them being able to draw their own visions, to be able to pull out what they've imagined in the way that they imagined it. So just make sure that you're balancing. For example, you can do this in your review work, where a couple of times a week for reviewing the previous day's work, you let them freely draw. They draw the picture, whatever moment from the story that they want to choose, they draw it just as they want to. Now they've gotten that expression out of them, they will probably be more willing to accept your interpretation, your expression of the picture, and put that on their pages. I think just like we said with play, some needs to be adult-led, some needs to be child-led. Even with drawing, we can see that same type of balance needed.
I wanted to add, Crystal, that sometimes you can allow them to just watch how you draw that picture too. How do you start? Because it might be that the child is just intimidated by the process. See that beautiful picture that the teacher has done, and how can I even come close to that? So maybe a simple picture that you do right in front of the children. And they don't have to, some of them probably won't want to or need to follow you exactly. But some of them might be helped along by that. But
Yeah.
I mean, they don't need to follow you exactly. They probably can do that picture from the board without having to follow the steps that you're doing. And it doesn't have to be that you're saying, now do this and now do that, but just have them watch how you do it.
I totally agree. And I'm so sorry I didn't even think of that. I'm not sure, Crystal, if you're saying that the drawing, I didn't even picture that. The drawing might already be finished and you're hoping that the children copy it. If that's the case, I strongly discourage you from taking that approach, especially in second grade. I wouldn't do that until maybe 5th or 6th grade. They definitely need you guiding them every step of the way through that drawing. Then you can have fun in those moments of actually creating the drawing with them. They are not ready to, well, especially if it's on a blackboard. First of all, that's got its own set of problems, trying to take what's represented in chalk on a black background and represent it with a different medium, crayon or pencil, on white paper. That's got its own set of challenges. Never mind just looking at a picture as a second grader and knowing where to start and how to recreate that. They need to be led through it. So I, as the teacher, would often, in fact, this is just what I did. I always put a piece of paper. I had a blackboard and I loved to draw things on the blackboard. But when it came to the main lesson work, I put a piece of white paper up on the board and I drew with the same kinds of materials that they were using, block crayons in second grade. I drew with crayons on that paper and showed them step by step how to create those drawings with their crayons on their paper at their desks. So I strongly recommend that you, if you haven't already, if you've just put up pictures, you now change that and engage with them step by step through the whole drawing process. They'll appreciate hearing how you are challenged by things too, like, ooh, drawing this rooftop is actually quite difficult. Let's try that again. Or, oops, I just put a little mouse on top of the chimney. I didn't mean to, but let's have a little mouse on top of the chimney. Those little things can be so delightful in those spontaneous moments with children, and they'll love you for that.
Yeah. And you can even, as they get older, you can even ask, say, something about that horse's leg is not right. And then they have all kinds of advice for you. Yeah.
These are great questions. Thank you. I hope no one feels by how we answered them that we were in any way trying to make anyone out to be wrong or in any way foolish for asking. These are absolutely, all these questions were things that I've had to deal with along the way, either as a parent or as a teacher. And it's so good to hear them from where you are exactly, and that you're open to hearing what we have to offer for your considerations. So thank you for having the courage to ask them and let us openly answer them like this. I hope it was helpful.
Great. And yeah,
That's
a
it.
wrap.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's it.
Everybody.
thanks again. And like we said, if you have more questions, we're always happy to answer questions. It's so wonderful to engage with you all, and we look forward to the next opportunity. So please stay in touch with us.
Yeah. Blessing on your parenting all.
Okay. I think Brian's going to close the meeting. So goodbye, everyone. Thanks again.